The silence was deafening. Alvin Cross felt his heart hammering against his ribs as he stood frozen before the massive gates of the Clarion Royal Chamber. These weren't ordinary gates, they were alive, breathing, pulsing with an energy that made his skin tingle from 20 feet away. The towering structure stretched upward like a living mountain, its surface rippling with waves of blue-white electricity. Strange symbols danced across its translucent panels, glowing brighter as they sensed his presence. The markings seemed to whisper secrets in a language older than human civilization, rewriting themselves into new patterns that hurt to look at. Directly, Alvin forced himself to breathe slowly, in and out, trying to calm a storm raging in his chest. His hands trembled slightly, and he clenched them into fists to hide his fear. In just moments, he would step into the very heart of the Clarion Empire, a place where no human had ever walked and returned unchanged. The weight of his mission pressed down on him like a mountain, but he stood firm, refusing to bow to the terror gnawing at his courage. The gates began to open with a sound like distant thunder, low and rumbling, vibrating through the floor and into his bones. Energy poured out like glowing mist, thick and warm against his face. A river of deep blue light flowed from the opening, creating a path that led into darkness so complete it seemed to swallow light itself. Alvin stepped forward, his boots echoing strangely in the vast space. The chamber that opened before him was beyond anything his mind could have imagined. The walls rose impossibly high, made of crystal that moved like slow water, casting dancing shadows in shades of purple and gold. Above him, the ceiling was a window into space itself. Stars wheeled in their ancient dance, and nebulae swirled in colors that had no names. At the far end of this cosmic cathedral sat the Clarion Queen on her throne. The massive seat was carved from a single piece of stone that seemed to contain trapped starlight, its edges flowing like liquid silver. She was a figure of terrible beauty and power, her deep blue skin glowing with an inner fire that made the air around her shimmer like heat waves. Her robes moved as if underwater, flowing and rippling with patterns that hypnotized anyone who stared too long. But it was her face, or rather, what covered it, that commanded attention. The mask was a thing of legend, forged from metal that changed color with her moods, hiding features that stories claimed could drive mortals mad with their alien perfection. Alvin had heard the whispered tales told in dark corners of human space stations. They said her true face was so beautiful it could blind you, so terrible it could steal your sanity, so alien that human minds simply couldn't process what they saw. He didn't believe in ghost stories, but standing here now, feeling the raw power radiating from her presence, he wondered if perhaps some legends held more truth than he wanted to admit. He took another step forward, then another. Each footfall rang out like a bell in the cathedral silence. Around the edges of the great hall, Clarion nobles floated in chairs that defied gravity, their ghostly forms glowing with pale light. Their sharp, angular faces turned toward him with expressions of shock and disbelief. A human here? In their most sacred space? The very idea was blasphemy. The guards noticed his approach and moved to block his path. They were tall, imposing figures wrapped in armor that gleamed like liquid mercury, the same mysterious metal as the Queen's mask. Their weapons, long spears crackling with energy, hummed with barely contained power. "Stop right there, human." The guard's voice boomed like a drum, vibrating through Alvin's chest and making his teeth ache. "You dare come too close to the sacred throne. No one approaches our sovereign without permission." Alvin lifted his chin, meeting the guard's burning gaze without flinching. His voice was steady, though his heart felt ready to burst from his chest. "I come in peace and with respect," he said, his words carrying clearly through the vast space. but I cannot deliver my message from across this great hall. If our worlds are to find peace, if we are to end the threat of war, then we must speak face to face as equals." The nobles gasped in unison, their whispers rising like the buzz of angry insects. The very air seemed to crackle with tension. The guard's grip tightened on his weapon until his knuckles went white. "You dare speak of equality? You presume far too much, little human." The spear began to glow brighter, energy building for a strike that would reduce Alvin to ash. But before the weapon could fire, the queen raised her hand, just a small gesture, barely noticeable. Yet its effect was immediate and absolute. The guard froze mid-motion, his weapon dropping to his side as if an invisible force had taken control of his body. The whispers died instantly, leaving only the soft hum of energy flowing through the chamber walls. "You speak with great boldness, human," the queen said, her voice like music made of starlight. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, bypassing his ears and resonating directly in his soul. "Few beings have dared to address me so directly. Even fewer have survived their arrogance." Alvin stopped just a few paces from the base of her throne. He bowed his head slightly, a gesture of respect, but not submission. He would not grovel, even here in the heart of alien power. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice carrying more confidence than he felt, "our worlds stand at the edge of a terrible cliff. Misunderstandings have grown into mistrust, and mistrust has brought us to the very brink of war. I believe I know that we can find another path, but not if we continue to hide behind walls of fear and ancient traditions." The queen tilted her head, studying him with an intensity that made his skin crawl. The lights on her mask shifted, forming patterns that might have been a smile, or something entirely alien. "You speak of walls and hiding as if they were simple things to remove," she said, her voice now carrying notes of amusement. "But you are naive if you think that removing barriers will solve what lies between our peoples. What you ask is not a small favor, human. Do you truly understand the danger of what you seek?" "I understand the risk," Alvin replied, though his heart was pounding so hard he could barely think. "But I also know that real understanding, true trust requires vulnerability. I am willing to face that danger if it means building a bridge between our species." The queen rose from her throne with a grace that seemed to mock the very concept of gravity. Her robes flowed around her like liquid starlight, and the air itself seemed to bend and shimmer in her presence. She descended the steps slowly, each movement deliberate and hypnotic, until she stopped just before him. Her towering presence forced him to crane his neck to look up at where her eyes should be behind the mask. "You speak of bridges and bonds," she said softly, her voice now barely a whisper that somehow filled the entire chamber. "Yet you know nothing of what you truly ask. This mask does not hide me for my own sake, but for yours. To see what lies beneath is to invite madness into your mind, to unravel the very fabric of your being. Still, you stand here asking to cross a line that no one has dared approach." Alvin swallowed hard, his throat suddenly dry as desert sand. But he refused to step back, refused to show weakness. "I stand here because someone must," he said, his voice growing stronger with each word. "If our species are to share this galaxy, if we are to live together instead of destroying each other, then we cannot do so from behind walls of fear and tradition. I don't fear what lies beneath your mask, Your Majesty. I fear what will happen if we never look past it." The queen stood perfectly still, studying him with an intensity that made the air itself seem to hold its breath. The nobles around the chamber stared in stunned disbelief, their glowing forms trembling with shock. Even the guards seemed frozen, unsure whether to attack or flee. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she raised her hand and placed it lightly on his chest. The contact sent a wave of energy surging through his body. Not painful, but overwhelming, as if the universe itself had opened a door within his mind. Stars exploded behind his eyes, and for a moment he felt connected to something vast and ancient beyond human understanding. The room erupted in chaos. Nobles shouted in outrage, their voices rising to a shriek of protest. The guards moved to intervene, weapons raised and crackling with deadly energy. But the queen turned her head slightly, and her gaze fell upon them like a physical weight. The word she spoke was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a blade. Enough. Silence fell instantly, absolute and complete. Even the energy humming through the walls seemed to quiet in response to her command. This human has come with sincerity and courage, she continued, her voice sharp and commanding. He will not be harmed while he stands under my protection. She stepped back, her hand lingering for a moment on his chest before falling to her side. The place where she had touched him continued to tingle with residual energy, as if she had left a part of herself behind. You have my attention, Alvin Cross, she said, and hearing his name spoken in her alien voice sent chills down his spine. But understand this, you tread a dangerous path. The road you have chosen may lead to understanding, or it may lead to destruction. Prepare yourself well, for tomorrow you will see the beginning of what you seek. Whether you survive it, that is another matter entirely. As the great gates closed behind him with a sound like distant thunder, Alvin felt the full weight of what he had done settle on his shoulders like a heavy cloak. He had defied every protocol, challenged traditions older than human civilization, and somehow walked away alive. His legs felt weak, and he had to stop and lean against a wall to catch his breath. The corridor around him pulsed with the same bioluminescent glow that seemed built into every Clarion structure, a rhythmic beat that reminded him of a sleeping giant's heartbeat. He closed his eyes and tried to process what had just happened, but his mind kept returning to that moment when she had touched him, when he had felt something vast and alien brush against his consciousness. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. What awaited him tomorrow could change everything or destroy him completely. The thought should have terrified him, but instead, he felt a strange sense of anticipation. For the first time in years, he was truly alive. Hours later, Alvin Cross sat cross-legged on the smooth, translucent floor of his quarters, trying to find some measure of peace and meditation. The room around him breathed with soft light, walls pulsing gently like the rhythm of a living heart. Every Clarion structure seemed to have this quality, as if it were grown rather than built, organic and alive in ways that human architecture could never match. He closed his eyes and tried to empty his mind, but the events of the previous day played on repeat like a broken recording. The Queen's commanding presence filled his thoughts, her cryptic warnings echoing in his memory. The electric charge of her touch still seemed to resonate in his chest, a warm tingling that hadn't faded even after hours had passed. Opening his eyes to the alien light, he forced himself to focus on why he was here. This wasn't just about diplomacy or politics, it was about survival. The human colonies, for all their resilience and determination, couldn't stand against Clarion technology. In open war, their ships were faster, their weapons more powerful, their understanding of energy and matter far beyond human science. Peace wasn't just preferable, it was the only way to avoid total extinction. That knowledge weighed on him like an anchor, keeping him grounded even as the enormity of his task threatened to overwhelm him. Billions of lives hung in the balance, and he was just one man, alone in an alien world, trying to bridge a gap that might be too wide to cross. A soft chime interrupted, his thoughts musical and clear. The door to his chamber slid open without a sound, revealing a Clarion attendant. The creature was tall and willowy, its translucent skin revealing networks of glowing energy that pulsed through its veins like liquid light. Its movements were fluid and graceful, more like a dancer than a servant. "The sovereign awaits," the attendant said, its voice calm and steady, completely devoid of emotion. There was no hurry in its tone, no sense of urgency, just a simple statement of fact. Alvin stood, his muscles protesting after hours of sitting in the same position. He nodded to the attendant, not trusting his voice to remain steady. Whatever was about to happen, he sensed it would be far more intense than their first meeting. He followed the attendant through the maze-like corridors of the citadel, marveling again at the alien architecture. The walls curved and flowed like frozen water, their surfaces smooth and seamless. There were no visible joints, no evidence of construction. Everything looked as if it had been grown from a single massive crystal. The air carried a faint metallic tang, a reminder of the alien energy that flowed through every inch of the building like blood through veins. They walked in silence for what felt like miles, passing through chambers filled with floating sculptures that moved in slow, hypnotic patterns. Gardens of crystalline plants grew in pools of liquid light, their branches reaching toward artificial suns that hung in the air like captured stars. It was beautiful and terrifying, a testament to a civilization that had mastered forces humans were only beginning to understand. Finally, the attendant stopped before a door unlike any other Alvin had seen. It was perfectly circular and completely opaque, its surface rippling like a pool of liquid mercury. Patterns flowed across its surface in waves, creating designs that seemed to shift and change when he wasn't looking directly at them. Without hesitation, the attendant gestured for Alvin to step forward. "Enter," it said simply, before melting back into the shadows as if it had never been there at all. The door parted like water as Alvin approached, revealing a chamber that defied his understanding of space and physics. The room was vast yet intimate, a strange paradox that seemed to define everything about the Clarion Queen. The ceiling arched high above him, made of some translucent material that provided a clear view of the cosmos beyond. Stars blinked and shimmered in the distance, their ancient light casting soft, ever-changing patterns on the chamber floor. The floor itself was a shallow pool of clear, warm liquid that rippled gently with each of Alvin's steps. The water, if it was water, seemed to glow with its own inner light, creating tiny galaxies of sparkles around his feet. At the center of the pool stood the queen, her back turned to him, perfectly still like a statue carved from living starlight. Her deep, blue skin seemed to absorb the starlight from above and radiate it back in waves of gentle luminescence. Her flowing robes moved despite the absence of any wind, rippling and flowing as if she stood at the bottom of a cosmic ocean. The sight of her was breathtaking and terrifying in equal measure. "You came," she said without turning around. Her voice was softer than before, more intimate, but no less resonant. Each word seemed to ripple through the water around his feet. "You summoned me," Alvin replied, stopping a respectful distance from her. His voice sounded strange in this place, smaller somehow, as if the vastness of the chamber had swallowed some of its strength. The queen turned to face him slowly, her movements fluid and graceful. Her mask caught the starlight and reflected it in mesmerizing patterns that seemed to shift and dance with her emotions. It was a thing of both beauty and terrible power, a veil that obscured her true form while somehow amplifying her presence. "You stand before me knowing the risks," she said, her voice carrying notes of curiosity and something that might have been admiration. "Few beings have the courage, let alone the endurance, to do so. Tell me, Alvin Cross, why do you persist? Why do you continue to push against barriers that have stood for millennia?" Alvin met her gaze, or what he imagined was her gaze behind the mask. "Because someone has to," he said, his voice growing stronger with conviction. If we don't take risks, if we don't push against those barriers, we'll remain trapped in the same cycles of fear and mistrust forever. We need something more than tradition and protocol. We need something real. The Queen studied him in silence, the air between them crackling with tension. The starlight above seemed to pulse in rhythm with her breathing, and the water around. Their feet began to glow brighter. Finally, with a graceful motion that made her robes flow like liquid starlight, she extended her hand toward him. Step closer, she commanded, her voice carrying an authority that made the very air vibrate. Alvin hesitated, not out of fear, but out of an instinctive understanding that crossing that final distance would change everything. Once he took that step, there would be no going back. The diplomatic mission would become something far more personal and dangerous. Still, he obeyed. He stepped forward through the glowing water, until he was mere inches from her towering presence. This close, he could feel the energy radiating from her skin, warm and electric and utterly alien. The Queen placed her hand lightly on his forehead, her touch warm, but carrying an intensity that made the air around them seem to vibrate like a struck bell. The contact sent waves of sensation through his body, not painful, but overwhelming, as if every nerve ending had suddenly come alive. Then let me show you what lies beyond the barriers, she said, her voice now barely a whisper that somehow filled his entire consciousness. The world around him began to dissolve like sugar in rain. Alvin felt himself falling, though there was no ground to catch him, no wind to push against his body. He floated in a void of swirling light and shadow, a place where time and space ceased to have meaning. Colors that had no names painted impossible geometries in the darkness around him. Voices filled the void, not spoken words, but pure emotion given form. He felt grief so deep it threatened to drown him, longing that stretched across eons, fury that could burn stars to ash, and hope so bright it made him weep. These were the voices of an entire civilization, their history written in feeling rather than words. And somewhere in that cosmic symphony, he began to understand what it truly meant to look beyond the mask. They washed over him in waves, each one more powerful than the last. He saw flashes of alien worlds, some thriving with vibrant life, others reduced to barren wastelands. He witnessed the rise and all of civilizations, the endlessical of creation and destruction. And then he saw her, the Queen, stood in the center of the maelstrom. Her mask, removed a true form, was indescribable, a shifting tapestry of light and energy that defied logic. Her face, if it could be called a face, was both terrifying and beautiful, a fusion of patterns that seemed to tell a story older than time itself. This is what I carry, her voice echoed not in his ears, but in his mind. The memories of my people, the weight of their hopes, their failures to bear this alone, is to endure an existence few could comprehend. To share it is to risk annihilation. Alvin felt his mind bending under the strain of it all. His chest tightened, his vision blurred, and for a moment he thought he might shatter under the sheer magnitude of what he was experiencing. But then something within him pushed back, a spark of defiance, of resilience. "I'm still here," he said, his voice trembling but steady. "I'm not going anywhere." The Queen's form flickered, and the chaos around them began to rest to death. Void collapsed into itself, and Alvin found himself back in the chamber, gasping for breath. The pool beneath him shimmered faintly, reflecting the cosmos above. The Queen stood before him, her mask once again in place. "You were stronger than I anticipated," she said, her voice carrying a note of something that might have been admiration, but strength alone will not be enough. What lies ahead will test every part of you, mind, body, and soul. Alvin straightened his legs, unsteady, but his resolve firm. "Then I'll face it," he said, "whatever it takes." The Queen nodded. "Return to your quarters, rest. Tomorrow, your true trial begins." As Alvin Tenedto leave, he couldn't shake the lingering sensation of her touch, or the weight of the vision she had shared. He knew he had crossed a threshold, one from which there was no turning back. The journey ahead would demand more than he had ever given, but he was ready. He had to be for humanity, for peace, and for the bond Henno shared with the enigmatic Queen Alvin. Cross entered the chamber with hesitant steps. The door ceiling shut bent him like a ripple through liquid glass. The air hummed thick and alive with energy, as though the room itself anticipated his presence. The celestial expanse above him glowed. Brighter tonight, the swirling stars, casting gradient light across the shallow pool that formed the chamber's floor. The liquid reflected the stars in another worldly shimmer, rippling softly. As he approached, at the center of the chamber stood the Queen, her deep blue skin glowing faintly in the starlight. Her robes, a cascade of flowing fabric that seemed alive, moved gently around her as though caught in an invisible current. Tonight, she was unmasked. Alvin found himself staring at her true face. Not a fixed form, but a dynamic tapestry of light and shadow, her features shifting and reforming in patterns that defied human comprehension. It was both mesmerizing and unsettling, a beauty so alien it felt untouchable. "You return," she said, her voice melodic yet edged with something sharper. "Tonight, a challenge. Perhaps you summon me." Alvin replied, his voice steady, though his pulse quickened under her gaze. "Good," she said, stepping forward. Her movements were fluid, each step causing the liquid floor to ripple outward. "Tonight, we take another step. You have seen fragments of what I carry. Now you will feel it." Alvin frowned, uncertain. "Feel it?" The Queen tilted her head, her shifting features forming something that might have been a smile, or perhaps something entirely different. "Words can only take us so far. Human understanding requires more. It requires trust, vulnerability, and connection." She extended her hand toward him, her long fingers elegant and glowing faintly. "Take my hand." Alvin hesitated. He had already seen the weight of her memories, the overwhelming chaos of lives and civilizations compressed into a single moment. The A of experiencing more, of feeling. It made his chest tighten, but Hess stepped forward, reaching out his hand, met hers, and the moment their palms connected, the chamber erupted in light. The stars above descended, their orbs of light circling the pair in an intricate dance. The liquid beneath their feet pulsed and shifted, reacting to their presence. Alvin felt a warmth surge through his body from the point of contact, spreading outward until it enveloped him entirely. "Do not fight it, Queen," said her voice. Softer now, "let it guide you." He realized she wasn't just holding his hand. She was guiding him with a gentle pull. She led him into motion. Her movements were precise, almost hypnotic, as though she had done this dance countless times before. Alvin struggled to follow it first, his steps clumsy and out of sync, the liquid beneath him splashing in protest. "Stop thinking," she said sharply, her tone cutting through his hesitation. "Feel." Alvin closed his eyes, focusing on the warmth of her touch and the rhythm of the chamber. The hum of the air grew louder, syncing with the beating of his heart when he moved. Again it was instinctive, his steps aligning with hers, a way that felt natural, even inevitable. The stars responded to their movements, their light growing brighter and forming patterns in the air. Alvin realized the patterns weren't random. They were a form of communication. Each step, each turn shaped the light into symbols he didn't understand, but could somehow feel. "What are we saying?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The Queen's reply was almost a sigh. "We are speaking truths you cannot yet comprehend, but listen, and you will begin to hear." As they moved, Alvin felt something shift. The warmth of her hand deepened, turning into a pulse that resonated through his entire body. It wasn't just physical, it was emotional, almost spiritual. He could feel her in a way he hadn't before, her strength, her sorrow, her relentless burden. "You've carried this alone," he said, his voice trembling with the realization. Queen's steps faltered for the briefest moment. "Do not presume to understand me," she said, though her tone lacked its usual sharpness. "I'm not presuming," Alvin said, his movement steadying, even as his voice wavered. "I can feel it, all of it. You've carried this for so long." And its crushing youth chamber seemed to react to his words. The stars dimmed, the liquid beneath them stilled, and the hum in the air Sophonet Queen stopped moving, her gaze fixed on him. "You feel what I allow you to feel," said her voice quieter. Now nothing more, but Alvin could see the truth in her. Shifting features in the way, her glowing skin dimed slightly, as though his words had touched a nerve. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "You don't have to keep everyone at a distance for a moment." The Queen said nothing then. With deliberate slowness, she stepped closer, closing the gap between them, until they were inches apart. Her free hand rose, brushing lightly against his temple. The touch was feather-like, but sent a surge of warmth through him, as though her energy was wrapping around his very essence. "You speak as though you understand," she said, her voice almost a whisper, but understanding comes at a cost. Before Alvin could respond, the chamber shifted again. The stars above swirled violently, their light growing blinding. The liquid beneath them rippled like a stormy scene. The hum in the air turned into a roar. "Do not let go," the Queen said, her hand tightening around his. The chaos around them intensified. The stars descending like burning meteors, their light searing into Alvin's vision. Heck closed his eyes, clinging to her hand as the storm raged. The warmth of her touch ensured him, keeping him steady, even as the world seemed to collapse. And then, as suddenly as it began, it ended. The stars returned to their places above. The liquid beneath them stilled, and the air grew calm. Alvin opened his eyes to find the Queen standing before him, her face unreadable, but her grip on his hand still firm. "You did not let go," she said, a note of approval in her voice. "I said I wouldn't," Alvin replied, his breath ragged. The Queen released his hand, stepping back. "You have proven yourself stronger than most, but strength alone will not be now. You must prepare for what comes next." As Alvin left the chamber, the warmth of her touch still lingered, a reminder of the bond they had begun to form. He didn't fully understand what had happened, but he knew one thing for certain. The Queen had let him in, if only for a moment, and that moment had changed everything. The cattle was hewn, Irving quiet as Alvin cross-followed the clarion attendant through the dimly lit halls. The shimmering walls that usually pulsed with energy were subdued, their glow faint and cold. The silence unnerved him more than the endless stares of the clarion nobles who had watched him with distrust since his arrival. He'd spent the night in restless contemplation, replaying the strange intimate dance he'd shared with the Queen. Her touch had been more than physical. It had been a doorway, a glimpse into the vast, incomprehensible weight she bore. Heck couldn't shake the memory of her hand tightening on his, or the vulnerability he had felt bleeding through her otherwise unshakable demeanor. The attendant stopped before a pair of towering doors, their smooth surface each with shifting luminous patterns. "Enter," it said simply before vanishing back into the shadows. Alvin squared his shoulders and stepped forward. The doors opened soundlessly, revealing a smaller chamber than he had expected. The space felt intimate, almost claustrophobic, compared to the expansive halls of the citadel. The walls, translucent and alive with faint currents of light, seemed to pulse in sync with his own heartbeat. At the center stood the Queen, her figure framed by the soft glow of the chamber. She was unmasked, her face, that shifting mosaic of light and energy, pulsed faintly, its patterns moving slower than before. She didn't turn to acknowledge him, her focus seemingly fixed on the small, crystalline structure before. "Hear you call for me," Alvin said, his voice steady despite the nod in his chest. The Queen turned, her expression unreadable. "You have proven resilient." Alvin Crossview would have endured what you have. Resilience is all I have, he replied. Nosh said, stepping closer. "You possess something far more dangerous, a mind can by fear. That is why you are here." Her words sent a shiver down his spine. "What happens now?" The Queen raised a hand, and the crystalline structure before her began to hum. Its surface shimmered, refracting light into the air around them. Alvin realized it wasn't just an object, it was alive, pulsing with energy like the chamber itself. "What you seek is trust," she said. "What you will find is truth." The hum grew louder, resonating in his chest. The walls of the chamber darkened, and the currents of light Within them slowed to a halt, fear felt heavy charged with anticipation. You have asked for vulnerability. The queen continued, her voice softer now. You have demanded connection, but do you understand what that means? I think so. Alvin said cautiously, then you are mistaken, she replied, her tone sharper. Now before he could respond, the queen reached out and placed her hand on his chest. It wasn't a gentle touch this time, it was firm, unyielding, and impossibly warm. Alvin felt the energy surge through him, not like the soft ripples of the dance, but a torrential wave crashing through his very being. The room dissolved. Alvin stood in a void vast and endless. It wasn't darkness, but an expanse of blinding light that pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm. He wasn't alone. The queen stood before him, her true form fully revealed. She was no longer constrained by robes or humanoid symmetry. She was a being of light and motion, her presence overwhelming and incomprehensible. This is what I am, she said, her voice echoing through the voidness. The sovereign you see, not the figure who wears the mask. I am the sum of my people, the weight of our past, and the custodian of our future. The void shifted, and Alvin saw flashes of her memories. He saw a world vibrant with life. The Clarion homeworld before its fall. He saw the rise of their empire, their technological and cultural brilliance. But he also saw the devastation. A war that had scarred them deeply. A loss so profound it had left their spec species fractured and dependent on her strength. I am their memory, she said, their pain, their hope, their fear. To lead is to carry this burden, to wear the mask that shields them from what they cannot endure. The images shifted again, faster this time. He saw her alone in the citadel, centuries passing, as she bore the unrelenting weight of her people's legacy. He saw her grieving, struggling, yet standing firm because she had no choice. Why show me this? Alvin asked, his voice trembling under the weight of what he was seeing. Bakehouse, you must understand, she said, stepping closer. You seek connection, but you don't yet grasp the cost to truly know me, to see me as I am is to risk yourself. Light around them dimmed, and the void shifted again. Alvin felt his own memories being drawn forth, his childhood on the fringes of human space, the loss of his family, to conflict the endless this struggle to prove himself in a galaxy that saw humanity as fragile and reckless. You are stronger than most, the queen said, but strength alone will not protect you from this. She reached out again, her light intertwining with his. Touch was different this time, gentler but no less intense. It wasn't just energy, it was emotion, raw and unfiltered. He felt her sorrow, her longing, her isolation, but he also felt the resolve, her unyielding commitment to her people. You're not as untouchable as I want them to think, Alvin said softly. Her light pulsed faintly as though she were laughing. No leader is, we all wear masks. Alvin cross, even you. The void collapsed, and Alvin found himself back in the chamber, his legs buckled and heffled to his knees, gasping for air. The queen stood over him, her expression unreadable. Once more you have seen me as no other has, she said. You have touched what lies beneath the mask. Few survive such an experience. Alvin looked up at her, his chest still heaving. Why me? Because you dare to ask, she replied simply. She extended a hand, helping him to his feet. Her touch was warm, steadying. You are not broken, she said, her tone carrying a hint of admiration. But you were changed, remember that as you continue. Alvin nodded, his mind still reeling from what he had experienced as the queen turned and left the chamber. He realized that the bond they had begun to forge was unlike anything he had ever imagined. It wasn't just a bridge between their worlds. It was something deeper, something unspoken, and it terrified him. The air in the chamber seemed heavier than before, thick with a tension that pressed against Alvin across his skin, like a physical weight. The space was darker than the others he had encountered in Thyte Citadel. Its walls a deep pulsating indigo that mirrored a steady heartbeat of faint golden light emanated from the ceiling, illuminating the figure at the center of the room, the Clarion queen. She stood with her back to him, her robes cascading around her like liquid starlight. The rippling glow of her deep blue skin was more subdued than usual, Almost dim, and her shoulders were tense, Alvin paused at the threshold, reluctant to interrupt her solitude. "You hesitate," she said, without turning, her voice softer than usual, but no less commanding. "You seem different." Alvin replied, his voice steady. But curious, he stepped forward, his boots clicking softly against the smooth glass-like floor. The Queen turned to face him, her mask absent. Her true face shimmered with shifting patterns of light and shadow, a living tapestry that seemed to convey motions beyond human comprehension. Her features were more focused than before, less fluid, and Alvin thought he caught something in her hesitation, or perhaps vulnerability. "This chamber is sacred," she said, her gaze fixed on him. "It is where a bond of leadership is forged, where the burdens of the past and future converge. I have never brought another here." Alvin stopped a few paces away from her, his brow furrowing. "Why bring me now?" The Queen stepped close, her luminous presence filling his vision. "Because you seek to bridge the distance between us, Alvin. Cross, you demand connection, trust, understanding, but you do not yet comprehend the cost." Her words hung in the air like a warning. Alvin clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. "I've come this far, show me what's next." Queen's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile, though her shifting patterns betrayed an undercurrent of sadness. "Very well," she said, "but understand this, what lies ahead cannot be undone. You will no longer be yourself, nor will I. Are you prepared? Forfeit?" Alvin nodded without hesitation. "If it means understanding you, understanding us, then I'm ready." She raised her hand, and the room responded. The golden light overhead grew brighter, the walls trembling with an energy that seemed to awaken from a long slumber. The air around them vibrated, and the floor beneath Alvin's feet pulsed faintly as if alive. "Step closer," she said. Alvin obeyed, closing the gap between them until they were inches apart. The Queen lifted both hands, placing them lightly against his temples. Her touch was warm, but the energy coursing through her fingers was intense, almost overwhelming. "What happens now?" Alvin asked, his voice quieter, almost reverent now. She said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We become." The world around him dissolved. Alvin felt himself falling, though there was no wind, no gravity, no sense of direction huant in the chamber anymore, but a boundless void filled with light and sound. The air, or what felt like air, was thick with whispers, fragments of voices he couldn't fully understand. He saw the Queen's memories flood into him. He stood in a world bathed in perpetual twilight, its skies painted with endless Arosh. Felt the joy of her people as they thrived in harmony, their unity as natural as breathing. But then the images shifted. He saw the betrayal that fractured them, the civil war that tore their world apart. He felt her anguish as leaders who had once stood beside her turned their backs, leaving her to bear the weight of survival alone. Her voice echoed in his mind. "This is what I have carried, every triumph, every failure, every choice." The visions continued faster. Now he saw her standing alone in Citadel's, centuries passing in solitude as she held her people together through sheer will. He felt the depth of her loneliness, a hollow ache that no amount of strength could fill. And yet through it all he felt her determination, her refusal to let her people's legacy fade into obscurity. Alvin's own memories surfaced in response. He saw himself as Arkeld, standing in the wreckage of a human colony destroyed by war. He felt bitterness of loss, the desperation to survive, the resolve to prove that humanity was more than fragile flesh. He felt the pain of failure and the quiet triumph of perseverance, the need to forge a future where peace wasn't just a dream. The connection between them deepened the boundaries of their minds, blurring. Alvin no longer knew where her memories ended and his ended, and his again. Her emotions, grief, hope, fear, love, became his own, and his thoughts spilled into her like a rushing tide. "You are stronger than I imagined," she said, her voice resonating in the void. "So are you." Alvin replied, his voice steady despite the storm raging within him. "You've carried this alone for too long. You don't have veto anymore." The light around them grew blinding, and the whispers in the air became a definite roar. Alvin felt the connection between them solidify, a bond unlike anything he had ever known. It wasn't just understanding, it was Unity were no longer two separate beings, but something greater, something Sharadwin. Alvin opened his eyes. He was back in the chamber, his knees buckled, and Heffel to the floor, gasping for breath. The Queen stood over him, her luminous form steady and bright. "You did not break," she said, her voice carrying a note of quietude. Alvin looked up at her, his chest still heaving. "I said I wouldn't," replied his voice hoarse, but resolute. The Queen extended a hand, helping him to his feet. Her touch was steadier now, more grounded, as though the bond they had forged had anchored her in a way she hadn't expected. "You are no longer just a man, Alvin Cross," she said, her pattern shifting into something softer, almost gentle. "You are part of me, as I am part of you. You together, we will face what lies ahead." Alvin met her gaze, his own thoughts steadier now. "Then let's not waste any time." The Queen's lips curved into a faint smile, and for the first time, Alvin thought he saw a flicker of hope in her ever-shifting light. Whatever came next, they would face it together, not as ruler and subject, but as equals bound by a connection that transcended. And for the first time in his life, Alvin felt truly whole. The golden light of the Citadel's corridor seemed dimmer as Alvin Cross made his way back to the chamber where his belongings were kept. Bond he had formed with the Queen only hours earlier weighed on him, not as a burden, but as a profound shift in his understanding of himself and the universe. He had glimpsed her innermost thoughts, her memories, and the core of her being. In doing so, he had become something more, part human, part Berselfa, the unity they had forged. But even as he walked, Alvin felt the stirrings of Funes. His steps echoed through the quiet halls, and he noticed the subtle movements of the Citadel's attendants there, translucent forms casting faint shadows in the bioluminescent glow. They watched him now, their gazes sharper, less curious, and more wary. The feeling of isolation gnawed at him. He had been accepted by the Queen, but the rest of the Clarins were not so quick to follow. When he reached his quarters, he found a figure waiting for him, one he hadn't seen before. The Chlorian noble stood tall, his angular features sharper than most, this translucent skin glowing faintly with hues of deep orange and green. His robes, adorned with intricate patterns of shifting light, signified his high rank. The air around him felt charged, almost hostile. "You have gone too far, human," the noble said, his voice resonating with a low hum that carried authority and disdain. Alvin stopped in the doorway, his instincts urging caution. "I wasn't aware there were limits to trying to understand one another." The noble's expression darkened, the light within him dimming slightly. "You have violated the sacred balance. The Queen is not meant to bond with outsiders. What you have done is unnatural, and it will have consequences." Alvin straightened, meeting the tumult noble's gaze. "What's unnatural is clinging to fear when the galaxy is at stake. The Queen understands that. Perhaps it's time you did too." The noble stepped forward, his voice growing colder. "You presume to lecture me about understanding. You are a fleeting creature, your kind barely emerging from the chaos of your own making. You have no place here." Before Alvin could respond, a new voice echoed through the corridor. "That is enough." The Queen's presence filled the space before she even stepped into view. Her flowing form emerged from the shadows, her light brighter than ever, her expression unreadable. The noble bowed slightly, but did not retreat. "Your Eminence, this human's actions were done under my guidance." The Queen interrupted, her voice calm but firm. "He has succeeded where others have failed. Do not mistake our progress for betrayal." The noble hesitated, his gaze shifting between Alvin and the Queen. "The Council will not see it that way. They will question your judgment." "Let them," the Queen replied, her tone colder. "Now my decisions are not theirs to question." The noble bowed again, his movements stiff with resentment, before retreating into the shadows. When he was gone, the Queen turned to Alvin, her expression softened, but the tension in her form remained. "You are not safe here," she said. Alvin frowned. "I thought we had moved past the threats. The Council has always been wary of outside Earth," she explained. "Our bond is unprecedented. They see it as a threat to tradition, to the balance they believe they protect." "Then let me speak to them," Alvin said. The Queen shook her head. "They will not listen, not yet." But there is another way. The Queen led him through a series of corridors that seemed to spiral deeper into the heart of the citadel. The air grew warmer, the light softer, until they reached a vast chamber unlike any he had seen before. The room was circular, its walls covered in flowing patterns of golden energy that moved like rivers. In the center stood a large crystalline structure, glowing faintly with the same golden light. "This is the core," the Queen said, her voice quieter. "Now it is the heart of the citadel, and the source of our unity. Through it I can amplify our bond and show the council what we have created." Alvin approached the core cautiously, its energy rays arcing through the floor with every step. "What happens if they reject it?" The Queen stepped beside him, her gaze fixed on the glowing structure. "Then they will see me as unfit to lead. The bond we share will be US against us. You may be exiled, or worse." Alvin turned to her, his jaw tightening. "We risk it then?" She met his gaze, her shifting patterns slowing into something calm and resolute. "Because I believe in what we have created, and because I will not let fear dictate my actions any longer." Alvin nodded, his resolve mirroring hers. "Then let's do it." The Queen placed her hand on the core, and the room filled with light. The golden energy surged, connecting them both to the citadel itself. Alvin felt the bond between them intensify, their shared thoughts and emotions flowing freely through the core. The connection spread outward, reaching every part of the citadel. The inner energy rippled through walls, carrying their bond to the council and beyond. Alvin felt the resistance, the fear, the doubt, but he also felt curiosity, and in some hope. Queen's voice resonated through the connection, speaking not in words, but in emotions and images. She shared her memories, her burdens, and the unity she had forged with Alvin. She showed them not just what they had become, but what they could achieve together. The energy pulsed brighter, and Alvin felt the tide begin to shift. The resistance faded, replaced by tentative acceptance. The Queen withdrew her hand, and the light dimmed, leaving the chamber in silence. When they returned to the main hall, they found the council waiting. The noble who had confronted Alvin earlier stood among them, his expression unreadable. The eldest member of the council stepped forward, his translucent form glowing faintly. "We have seen what you shared, Sovereign," he said, "and while it challenges everything, we know it is clear that this bond holds promise." The Queen inclined her head. "Then you accept it?" The elder hesitated, his light flickering. "We accept that it is worth exploring, but know this, human, the path ahead will not be easy. There are those who will not accept this union, no matter what they have seen." Alvin nodded. "Nothing worth doing is ever easy." The elder guided him for a long moment before stepping back. The council dispersed, leaving the Queen and Alvin alone in the hall. "You have done more than I thought possible," the Queen said, her voice softer. "No." Alvin smiled faintly. "So have you." For the first time, the Queen allowed herself a small, genuine smile. This is only the beginning. As they stood together in the quiet hall, Alvin felt the weight of what they had accomplished. It wasn't peace, not yet, but it was a step forward, and for now that was enough. The chamber's golden light seemed to pulse in time with Alvin Cross's heartbeat. The core, the pulsating heart of the citadel glowed steadily, casting radiant patterns on the smooth, reflective walls. The air hummed with an intensity that felt alive, vibrating with the weight of decisions that had led to this moment. Alvin stood beside the Queen, their bond an unspoken presence between them. The council had accepted the unity they feared, but it was a fragile truce. The lingering tension among the Clarion elders and the unspoken doubts of the gathered nobles still hung heavy. Yet in the quiet of this sacred chamber, Alvin felt the possibility of something more, a future not defined by fear, but by trust. The Queen stepped forward, her luminous patterns shifting in soft waves that reflected her thoughts. She turned to face him, her expression calm, but her energy charged with something deeper. "They see what we have created, that their acceptance is tenuous," she said, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. To them, this bond is an anomaly, a breach in the traditions that have defined them for centuries. "They'll come around," Alvin said, his tone steady. "What we've shown them What we've proven isn't something they can deny. She studied him for a long moment, her swirling patterns slowing into something almost contemplative. You have more faith in them than I do. Alvin stepped closer, his hand brushing lightly against hers. The contact sent a familiar warmth through him, a resonance that reminded him of their unity, their shared essence. Maybe I'm borrowing some of yours. The queen tilted her head, her luminous form softening in the golden light. You borrow nothing, Alvin. Cross your have become more than you realize. Her words hung in the air, between them heavy with meaning. Alvin searched her face, the ever-shifting patterns of light and shadow, the faint glow that seemed to pulse with her every thought. In that moment, she seemed less like the untouchable sovereign of the Clarins and more like the woman who had trusted him with her deepest truths. Have he asked, his voice quieter now. She stepped closer, the space between them narrowing until could feel the faint warmth radiating from her skin. You have seen what no other has seen, felt what no other has felt. You not just human anymore, Alvin, you are us. Her words weren't an accusation or a claim, they were a truth, one he felt in every fiber of his being. Bond they shared had reshaped him, his thoughts, his emotions, even his understanding of himself. He wasn't just an emissary between their species, he was a bridge, a part of something larger than himself. As if sensing his thoughts, the queen raised her hand, her fingers brushing against his cheek. The touch was light, almost hesitant, but it carried an intensity that made him still. Do you feel it? She asked, her voice a whisper. I feel everything, he admitted, his chest tightening under the weight of the connection between them. Yumi, us. It's all connected, she finished, her gaze locked on his. There is no separation. Now not truly. Her hand lingered on his cheek, her touch igniting something within him, a warmth, a pull, a need that went beyond anything he'd ever experienced. The core pulsed brighter, its golden light intensifying as though it too responded to the energy between them. I didn't expect this, Alvin said, his voice trembling with emotion. Any of it, neither did I, she replied, her voice steady but laced with a vulnerability he had never heard before. But here we are. Her other hand came to rest against his chest, just above his heart. The energy of their bond surged between them, not chaotic or overwhelming as it had been during their earlier trials, but steady and powerful. Alvin covered her hand with his fingers intertwining with hers. As the space around them seemed to dissolve, Therum melted away into a golden void, the core's light enveloping them. There was no floor, no ceiling, no sense of direction, only the two of them, suspended in a sea of light. Their bond deepened, the connection between them, no longer confined to thoughts or memories. It was something physical, tangible, an unbreakable thread that tied their very essences together. The queen leaned closer, her face mirror inches from Hisiawa. No longer an outsider, she said, her breath warm against his skin. You are Amin, as I am yours. Alvi's heart raced, but he didn't pull away. Instead, Helened into her, their foreheads touching. As the golden light around them pulsed in rhythm with their bond, he felt her emotions flooding through him, her strength, her resolve, her longing, her fear, and she felt his in return. There were no walls, no barriers, no masks, only truth. Her lips brushed against his, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through him. Not just physical, but something deeper. It wasn't a kiss born of passion, but one of unity, of acceptance of a connection that defied explanation. When she pulled back, her gaze met his, and he saw something he hadn't expected. Hope, we're stronger together, she said, her voice firm, but laced with emotion. Always, Alvin replied when the golden void receded, and the chamber returned. The core pulls brighter than ever, its energy blowing through the walls and out into the citadel. Alvin felt the shift. Immediately the air was lighter, the tension from before dissipating, as though the citadel itself had accepted their bond. The queen stepped back, her luminous pattern soft but steady. The core has recognized us, said our unity is complete. Alvin nodded, his breath still uneven, but his resolve stronger than ever. Then it's time we show the galaxy what that means, she smiled faintly, her hand lingering in his for a moment longer. before she turned toward the chamber doors. Yes, it is time. As they walked side by side out of the chamber, Alvin felt the weight of their connection settle into something steady, unshakable. He wasn't just a human diplomat anymore, and she wasn't just a Clarion. Sovereign together, there was something new emerging the galaxy had never seen before. And as the stars outside the citadel shimmered with renewed brilliance, Alvin knew their journey was only beginning.